groups of companies getting together. And I really encourage you as recruiters to say, if you're in, recruiting for electrical engineers or you're recruiting for project managers, get together and share your data if you're in non-competing industries. Because I think in the end that raises all your ability to figure out what's going on in this space. But it's a matter of we've got to figure out how to get this data, just like the manufacturing industries figured out how to get supply data about iron ore and steel. And this just didn't happen. There's no government agency that does this. It was industry groups that got together and began to put this data together for them. And I think we're going to have to do the same thing as we move into this. All right, anything else? Or? Okay, how about group 3?
Well, they covered most of what we were talking about. So
okay.
We talked about many of those things, but what we spent a lot of time on was more around the competition and who are we competing with and what are their employee value propositions. Yeah. So that was where we spent a lot of our discussion, having Lithuania representatives from Saudi Arabia. Yeah. And actually going to different places like India, et cetera, and trying to recruit talent and finding that you think that you can find, you think there's a plethora of talent there, but the reality is the candidate demands a lot of money, and so it's very difficult, and so there's a lot of talk around that. Yep. The other piece that we talked about was the growth rate. So once the supply actually comes into the organization.
Lots of organizations have worked with them where they say, we want to develop our people. We want them to, we want to continue to provide them with ways to develop, but they don't have a policy for paying them back for their college tuition. There's no college tuition reimbursement policy. Something like this. So here's a typical gap. We say we want you to go back to school, but we don't help you do that. There's no policy to help you do that. So is there disconnects between what you say and what the policies in your HR function are and how those are implemented? So that's just a real simple, not necessarily simple, but it's a straightforward process to look at what are you saying, what are your needs, and do we have the HR policies and push procedures and so forth in place to make it possible to do whatever it is you want to do. And so, how do you ask the questions like, how many people with the critical skills are there that we need, and this kind of thing. I'm not going to read these. You can read those questions. I think this is a good one here, this first one. What mix of regular and part-time or contingent people could we use? And again, typically in my experience, if a hiring manager has a regular employee that quits, then they want to hire another regular employee. And maybe they shouldn't. Maybe it should be a consultant or a contractor or a part-time person. So you have to, I think as a recruiter, increasingly have to ask these questions and work with hiring managers on that. And I would say that historically most of us have just taken an order. Basically the hiring manager says hire somebody, and we say okay, and we go and we execute the order. We don't push back. We don't ask these kinds of questions.
Every vacancy is a chance for a change.
It's time for a change. It's a chance for a change. It's an opportunity to rethink these things. And I think we need to encourage managers to take that opportunity and rethink it, rather than just assuming that what was is what should be. So there's a model that we've kind of put together for workforce planning altogether. You can download a copy of this and look at it more carefully, but basically the front end of this model is what we've been talking about here. It's all of these external issues, the supply, the demand side. So the bottom line is the result of that is, do we understand our current state? So I think you have to ask yourself as an organization, and I don't mean just you are very important, but do we as an organization, our management team, our CEO, do they understand our current state around the people that we need to hire and what's going on? In order to do that, you need to communicate that. You need to have a strategy within human resources to communicate these issues to senior management. That may be executive briefings, it may be fact sheets, it may be a series of one-on-one meetings, but the bottom line is you need to have a communication strategy for what's going on out here and what you need to do as recruiters. I rarely see an HR group that has a communication strategy in place, rarely. Then you need to conduct your gap analysis that we just talked about. Where's the gaps? Here's the demand, here's the supply we think we need, here's the current state, what's the gap? And where is the gap going to be the most difficult for us to deal with? For example, if we're hiring a lot of engineers and we look at the supply and we say, the supply is very limited and almost non-existent, So it's a huge gap between, we're projecting we're going to need 100 engineers over the next 5 years. And yet our supply shows that we're only going to have a reliable supply of 20 or 25. So where are we going to get the other 75 engineers? And then you can begin to make an analysis about the plan for change. So what are we going to do about it? You know, what's our plan? Are we going to do development? Are we going to change our recruiting strategy? You know, how are we going to deal with that potential gap? What's our change strategy? And then you think that you can produce scenarios, which we're going to talk about a little later, about what possible things might be occurring out there and what you could do about it. That little scenario I just mentioned, we need 100 and we only get 25. Well, that's a scenario. What are we going to do about that? How would we overcome that? You can create a better attraction strategy. You can create better retention strategies. You can create better development opportunities. So there's a lot of things you can do, and the solution is probably some mix of all of those things. And then you need to look at a future vision and where you want to be in the future, and you need to measure and modify what you're doing. So it's kind of a simple model that kind of helps you to think through what are the steps to a good workforce plan. But you know, the counting and the spreadsheet part of this is pretty minimal. It's really all this other stuff that's so critical. It's the communications plan, it's the gap analysis, it's making sure your organization, your management team knows what's going on and what the needs are. And then it's about putting together the action plans to do something about it in the future. So if you really look at it in another way, you could say that workforce planning is your recruitment strategy. And good workforce planning should drive a big chunk of, if not all of your recruitment strategy and a significant part of your HR strategy. In some companies they are. I can even name some companies where the CEO is critical, but that's not true of all companies. So I think that, you know, it's not a hierarchy thing. In fact, there was a little study done at Disneyland in California around this, and they looked at 4 positions in Disneyland. And I'll ask you about these. The characters, the people who play Mickey Mouse and things like that. The people who operate the rides, you know, the operators of the different rides that kids go on. Third thing is the people who sell you food or products. And the fourth thing are the people who clean the streets and pick up the trash and walk around Disneyland. Now, of those 4 levels, or those 4 positions, only one was considered, they're all very important and you couldn't run Disneyland without them, but one was considered the most critical. Which one do you think it was?
Characters.
How many think the characters? Mickey Mouse, etc. Okay. How many think the ride operators? Okay. How many think the people who sell concessions? Okay. Pretty good split. How many think the street sweeper? Yeah, the street sweeper. And the reason why is that they have the most direct contact with the public, and people form their opinion of Disneyland based on their experience with those people. Because very typically at Disneyland, you need to ask where to go, or to get directions, or to find out about which ride is got the shortest line today, or something like that. And those people have those answers. So when Disneyland did this activity, they rethought their whole recruitment and training process for those people. Now they mostly hire college students to be those street sweepers. And every day they teach them about, you know, which rides are broken today, which rides are got the short lines today. They give them a briefing every morning. So when the public comes in there and asks a question, they can answer the question intelligently. So it's not a hierarchy thing. It's what do you do? They have the most contact with the customers of Disneyland. The ride operators and the other people, you only have contact with them for a few seconds. But everybody else, but this person you might talk to for 2 or 3 minutes. So it's a very different relationship. So